Shortly after its launch in 1996, the Nintendo 64 received one of the most beloved sequels of all time, Mario Kart 64. Taking the cutesy kart racing concept from the first game on Super Famicom and exploding it out into real 3D. Players were greeted by 16 themed tracks, 8 selectable characters, and addictive 4-way local multiplayer if you had enough controllers on hand. If you grew up around this time, chances are high that you may have hosted or been invited to a friend's Mario Kart Jamboree. You know, an evening with pizza, your favorite sugary beverage, and as many CCs as your little heart could handle. In spite of the game's simplicity and balance issues when viewed in comparison to its sequels, the first 3D game in this series still remains an iconic kart racer to this day. And until very recently, you could really only enjoy this game while playing it on original N64 hardware or by emulation, meaning you had to either make compromises in authenticity or potentially fluidity just to experience the sights and sounds of Mario Kart 64. That is, until the middle of June in 2025, Spaghetti Kart published its first public release. Spaghetti Kart is a decompilation release of Mario Kart 64 for the PC, Linux, and Mac, and potentially other platforms. To come into being, these ports required the arduous and long-winded clean room decompilation of the game's original programming. Only with that hard work out of the way could these ports be made, like PC One I am showcasing for this video. Based upon the repository it is found in and a number of other clues from the option menu and opening video, this release appears to share various hallmarks and characteristics with the Ship of Harkinian release of Legends of Zelda Ocarina of Time, as well as a number of other decompilations, such as Starship Centauri Alpha. Like those releases, this decompilation port of Mario Kart 64 does not ship at all with any of the game's original copyrighted art assets, and these have to be added into the EXE with your very own ROM dump of the N64 cartridge. If you can manage that step, then you are in for a wonderful recreation of that mid-90s kart racer with many vital enhancements to make it play and look the best it possibly could. A key reason why the game can have these enhancements is due to it being a decompiled port for the PC platform. This is not emulation like in the old days, but fully running native gameplay code on the local PC. As such, it can be tuned to be aware of various PC configurations, and for that same reason, it can also be much lighter on hardware while being visually faithful, much more easily than emulation could have possibly achieved before within the same performance envelope. But beyond performance metrics, which I will talk about later, what does Spaghetti Kart bring to the table next to that N64 release? Well, side by side, there are quite a few things one can easily notice. First, we have resolution and potential frame rate. On the right, running on PC, Spaghetti Kart is rendering internally at 8K with 8x MSAA here, downsampled to 4K, which, even not including those geometry subsamples, we're looking at 432 times the spatial resolution of that N64 original. The game is pristine and sharp, almost to a fault. Then we have the frame rate. Here I captured the game at 4K 120 FPS. The original Mario Kart 64 runs at a less than stable 30, with drops, as you can imagine given the hardware in that system and the early era of 3D rendering we are talking about here. Spaghetti Kart is much smoother as it takes that original 30 FPS limit and offers animation interpolation beyond that, all the way up to an arbitrary limit of 360 FPS like you can see in other decompilation projects from this team. Capturing the game at 240 FPS at 1080p, we can see a level of smoothness that we could have only dreamed about in the mid-90s. This elevates the presentation in a way that I would say is much more impactful than the resolution enhancements, as the sense of speed is greater and your subjective perception of controls and handling is increased. Technically, there are similar wait times between certain button presses due to how interpolation works, but the interpolated animation in-betweens, as you can call them, will give you earlier visual feedback than that N64 version. In motion, it just looks and feels a lot better to play at such high frame rates. Beyond those more simple and expected augmentations, the game's option menu, accessed by hitting escape, gives you some more expansive capabilities. Being a native PC version, you also have access to control over the game's displayed aspect ratio, going from the original 4:3 to native widescreen, 16:10, and even ultra-wide. As we can see at ultra-wide here, while in-game, The HUD elements showing position on track, time on course, lap number, and such all map to the respective edges of the screen, adhering to the new screen real estate selected in the menu. This is pretty awesome support for less common aspect ratios during the gameplay sections, though it doesn't carry over well to all aspects of the game. Even at normal widescreen, you can find areas where there are gaps in coverage, or where 4:3 is the only thing that exists right now, as there's no art made for other aspect ratios. But in gameplay, it is a nice bonus, even if it is just something small. You can technically see other racers catching up to you in the screen periphery at higher aspect ratios, and that's kind of a cool thing you can take advantage of. Like any good game coming from the Nintendo 64, you also have options for how texture filtering occurs. Many aspects of the game's 2D art, like the HUD and the menu options, are unfiltered in the original, presenting sharp and pristine pixels at the original 320x240 resolution. But in-game, 3D geometry and some sprite work is filtered on the N64 version, and that continues over to this version. For such elements, you can choose the original 3-point texture filtering found in the Nintendo 64, as shown on the far right here. And you can find typical linear filtering as seen in the middle, and even turn off filtering as on the far left. Unlike a number of N64 games, this one doesn't greatly lean into the aesthetic considerations from 3-point filtering, so you're not losing much just by using linear hardware filtering. No filtering, though, isn't an option I would choose unless you really just want to see how it looks. The game was designed around texture filtering in mind and the blending it has, so some areas like we can see here on the ground, where there's two adjacent colors that lack blending and have different pixel sizes, well, that can look a little bit less than optimal without filtering. But it's a cool option if you want to imagine an alternative universe where this game shipped on PC with software rendering. Beyond this, you have some greater enhancements under the enhancement menu, like the ability to toggle off some LOD behavior and get rid of the original occlusion coloring. Those sound nice on paper, but only one of the options seems very useful at the moment. On the tracks I investigated, I could not find a difference with that LOD option enabled. In fact, I'm not sure if it's working at the moment. You can still see track geometry and more, simplifying at a distance and causing popping. The one track I did see a difference on was due to that disable occlusion culling enhancement, and that was Rainbow Road. With the original behavior, running around this track sees large sections of it at a distance popping in as you get closer, and then disappearing again as you move away from them. With occlusion culling turned off, most of the track popping is gone, and it can be visible at any given viewpoint, which I think greatly aids the visuals on this track. Now, not all of the track culling is gone, mind you, and you can still see it occurring occasionally, but it is a nice visual win that will cost nothing on today's hardware. And lastly, the biggest feature I want to highlight is the real-time track editing option. Here you can change sky color, music, and much more to be saved to a later date, should you so wish. I think this remixing capability is going to have long legs for future modding and game expansion. Speaking of which, the game does natively support modding out of the gate with full-on asset replacement. Given the nascent existence of Spaghetti Kart, though, I did have trouble tracking down any visual mods, but I imagine in due time we'll see things like HD texture work and even replacement geometry. Hopefully we can see a port of those amazing HD sprites highlighted a few years back by Narelle, which look incredible and would be a great boon to this game's visuals at modern HD resolutions. Alex from the future here. While editing this video, something amazing happened. The Mario Kart 64 recompilation released in a beta form. That's separate from the decompilation Spaghetti Kart thing I'm covering here. And amazingly, those HD textures I was just talking about from the Narelle video were immediately ported to that recompilation effort. So if you do want to check them out and what they bring to this game, the recompilation would be an amazing place to do that, as you can see on screen right here. With the recompilation, you have a similar, though admittedly more limited customization options than the Spaghetti Kart, but you can use these HD sprites and textures as developed by Andrat and others, and these HD sprites take the game's very low resolution 2D artwork and blow it up to 4K and higher, and they are completely custom art in the style of the workstation pre-rendered artwork that Nintendo used for box art, promotional art, and stock game assets in the middle of the 90s, kind of like how Rare did it back then for their games. And you can see all these amazing, unique sprite rotations and graphics in motion, but with the high-end game CGI look from the 90s that is an absolute trip, and I definitely recommend giving the recomp a try, presuming you can provide your own personal ROM for it. This is, of course, completely optional texture work that I'm talking about here, and it is totally based on taste. And if you do not want to use it, you're going to be stuck with the game's original artwork blown up to high resolution. And I would say that the game's lo-fi nature in that 2D artwork is only barely aided by modern rendering resolutions. The better anti-aliasing is appreciated versus the original, but at any semi-modern resolution, the game's texturing and sprite work really starts to fall apart and lose its seamlessness, which it arguably has when it is obfuscated by the original 240p resolution of the Nintendo 64. Hence why I think the best way to play this game is actually at lower resolutions, but with lots of downsampling. Here, I'm showing the game at 480p downsampled. This leads to a clean image when placed next to the N64, but it's not overly sharp. Although I think it could look better here if the game actually supported higher than 200% downsampling, like 800%. With downsampling, as we can see here though, there is not such a great disparity anymore between the 2D art and the screen space resolution. It is cleaner and still handsome next to the N64 presentation without looking artificial. Many older games on modern platforms, I think, personally look better with downsampling at original resolution or resolution slightly higher than the original. You get less flicker, but without the sterile look that high resolution can incur if the 2D res is dramatically lower than the output res. As you can imagine, playing at 480p, as I am showing here, is perhaps best shown off on an original display type that the game was designed around. That is right, on a CRT. Checking it out on a CRT PC monitor, I would say that the game does indeed look best when played here. The glow of the phosphors and the immediate motion precision greatly enhance the aesthetics of the game at 60Hz or 120Hz or even higher. Owning a CRT these days, though, is definitely a luxury, and I cannot imagine many of you have one, so CRT shaders will be the next best alternative. Here, using Reshade, there are so many options to choose from. Check out this 480p Meta CRT filter I tried out. It looks okay, a little dark though, which could be changed with some configuration. Or how about this, a 240p scale of the game with the adaptive CRT shader. Now this one I think looks rather authentic. With the CRT shader you can run the game at any res you want really, and then the shader will typically downsample to the simulated res for you. So you can get the benefits of downscaled resolution and MSAA for clean edges, and the texture detail in the 240p grid will soften the game to look more like its original presentation. Of course now at much higher FPS. Whether on a CRT or on a CRT shader, there are definitely many ways to enhance the presentation beyond resolution, and it is easy to make Spaghetti Kart look authentic and visually consistent. And at this moment, I bet you're wondering, what does it actually take to run Spaghetti Kart? Well, any halfway modern computer will work more than fine. The game does ship with a native Linux version, which works especially well when loaded up on the Steam Deck. Utilizing OpenGL and a 16:10 aspect ratio, the Linux port ran perfectly fine on the deck at 1600p internal resolution with 8x MSAA, targeting 60 FPS on my OG deck. Zero issues, and I imagine other handhelds and low-end computers will run this game with blistering frame rates at even higher resolutions. In the end, you have to remember, this is an extremely lightweight game due to its mid-90s vintage, and the fact that it is no longer being emulated, but is instead natively running the code. Anything can run it essentially. Even a 17-year-old Windows Vista PC equipped with a Q6600 and DX10 8800 GT managed to play the game at 1536p with 8x MSAA and OpenGL using that 3-point texture filter, all at 60 FPS. So even retro PCs can play it. The only thing truly preventing this game from running on toasters and even older PC hardware are its current API and DLL requirements, keeping it to around Windows Vista era at the earliest as far as I can tell. If this decompilation had a software or a glide renderer like the Super Mario 64 PC decompilation, then I'm pretty sure PCs from the 90s would also run this game really well at 60 FPS with little issue. general then, Spaghetti Kart is a great new way to experience this classic game, though I would be remiss to mention that we're looking at an early version here as of this video's production date. So there are some things that still need improvement. You can find some crashes I've found, specifically when accessing the in-game save data. Another issue I found is with the animation interpolation. It is amazing, but it has faults. Some of the aspects of the game still, of course, run only at 30 FPS, like the checkered motorsport flag in the main menu, or any of the screen transition effects. Also, the animation interpolation arguably is interpolating a bit too much at times. For example, each camera cut from the game's chase cam after races or in the attract mode all have the camera position interpolate to midway points instead of being straight cuts. This leads to frames between camera cuts looking odd as they display an interpolated point in the world for a split second. This comes with the territory given how it is using naive frame interpolation, but given how this is a bespoke PC version, this issue could be potentially avoided. For the moment though, if you want to use interpolation, which I recommend, and want to reduce the awkwardness of camera cuts, you can reduce them by just playing the game at much higher frame rates. At 240 FPS, for example, it becomes almost imperceptible due to the low persistence of each frame. Speaking of frame rates, that is the last critique I have this version as of now. It only goes up to 360 FPS. I know that's a bit silly from me to critique, but it is an arbitrary limit, and in an area where there are 500 Hz monitors and probably 1000 Hz monitors around the corner, we've got cool stuff like CRT beam scan shaders out there. In my opinion, it would be great if all these decompilations got rid of max interpolation caps so that PCs of the future could play these games with pixel perfect response and clarity. With that being said, I'm at the end of this video covering Spaghetti Kart, a faithful and truly appreciated decompilation project. If you did like it, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Ring the bell for instant notifications when we publish videos. Support on Patreon, follow on Blue Sky, and as always, this is Alex, bidding you farewell und auf Wiedersehen.